Hey! Before we dive into this harrowing true account, make sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Picture this: in the still silence of dawn, a shadow crept upon a peaceful morning, and the unthinkable unfolded in a heartbeat. Someone was about to steal my best friend. I woke that day with an unaccountable mixture of excitement and dread. The early sunlight, weak yet persistent, poured through the lace curtains of my modest apartment on Maple Street, casting long, wavering shadows on the worn wooden floor. I had always felt that mornings held secrets, subtle hints that something was about to change. But I never could have imagined that this day would shatter the comforting rhythm of my life. I was preparing for my usual morning walk with Buddy, my loyal and spirited golden retriever who had been by my side for almost a decade. His gentle eyes and enthusiastic tail wags were my constant reminder of the unconditional joy life could offer. As I laced up my sneakers and stepped outside, the cool breeze whispered along the neat sidewalks of our quiet suburban neighborhood. Every day felt like a gentle ritual, a moment of peace before the hustle of the day truly began. The neighborhood was still stirring from slumber as I opened the gate and set off with Buddy trotting happily beside me. I noted the familiar faces of early risers, the graying Mr. Lawson, watering his beloved roses in the yard, and Ms. Ramirez, who had a tiny garden of wildflowers in front of her house. The world was quiet, yet every sound was amplified: the rustling of dry leaves, the distant hum of a car engine, and Buddy's excited panting as he sniffed everything in his path. As we ambled along the cracked pavement, my mind revisited memories of simpler times, where every step and every familiar corner held a story. That was until I glimpsed something unusual out of the corner of my eye: a sleek, dark sedan parked a little too deliberately on the side of the street. There was an aura about the car that felt completely foreign to the gentle morning routine. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that pricked the back of my neck like a stray thorn. The sedan's tinted windows concealed any hint of life inside, yet there was something deliberate about its placement, as if it were waiting for a signal. A subtle unease began to curl in my stomach. I instinctively tightened my grip on Buddy's leash, and his ears perked up, his head tilting as if he sensed the same disturbance. The synchronicity between us was one of those rare, profound connections, one that transcended words or logic. We turned onto our usual path toward the local park, a modest expanse of green bordered by towering oaks that had silently watched over generations. The park was typically a haven, a place where children's laughter mixed with the soft murmur of water from the central fountain, and where neighbors exchanged pleasantries under the bright morning sun. Today, however, the park looked unusually subdued, as though it were holding its breath in anticipation of some unspoken drama. I could not shake the nagging suspicion that something was amiss. The subtle clatter of my footsteps on the gravel and Buddy's measured pace gradually merged with an ominous silence that felt as heavy as a storm cloud. Suddenly, near the park's entrance, a figure caught my eye, a person lingering in the shadows beneath a large elm tree. They were dressed in a dark, nondescript outfit that perfectly merged with the gloom of early morning, and their posture was unnervingly still. As I drew nearer, I noticed the individual's eyes roaming the surroundings with a disturbing intensity, scanning every movement with clinical precision. Buddy's happy trot faltered. His alertness was contagious, and a rush of adrenaline surged through me as I realized that this stranger might not belong in our peaceful routine. I exchanged a cautious glance with an elderly man walking his own dog a few yards away. His eyes widened momentarily with a silent question, as if to ask, "Do you see that too?" Yet, in that moment, the answer was written all over our concerned expressions. I decided to quicken my pace, urging Buddy along with gentle coaxing. However, as we navigated through the tree-lined paths of the park, I noticed subtle signs that corroborated my growing anxiety. A discarded glove by the pathway, not left behind by any of the regular park visitors, and the faint remnants of a hastily extinguished cigarette in an ashtray abandoned near a bench. They were details that spoke of secrets and mischief in a place where only the ordinary should reside. The park's atmosphere was rapidly transforming from one of serene normality to something charged with latent threat. I couldn't help but draw parallels between the calm exterior of nature and the turbulent undercurrent of human intentions that sometimes lay hidden beneath the surface. The interplay of light and shadow, once a delightful dance at dawn, now appeared as a sinister play of deception. Every rustle in the bushes, every whisper of the wind seemed to conspire with a growing sense of impending doom. Without warning, my worst fears materialized in the most startling of ways. As Buddy and I neared the central fountain, a place of joyful childhood memories for many, I caught sight of the mysterious figure again. This time, they were not lurking at the periphery but edging closer to where Buddy trotted cheerfully. I remember the precise moment when my heart pounded so fiercely that the sound seemed to echo in the still air. It was as though every beat was a desperate plea to intervene. In a flash, the stranger broke into a brisk run, purpose etched into every determined stride. I reacted without hesitation, adrenaline fueling my legs as I sprinted to intercept them. The park's familiar pathways blurred into a tapestry of rapid motion, my vision tunneled on the dreadful impossibility unfolding before me. Buddy, startled by my sudden urgency, darted in the opposite direction, toward the deeper, less frequented part of the park where the trees grew thicker and the light dimmer. The scenario that had seemed so benign moments ago was now disintegrating into a chaotic scramble for a beloved friend. I reached the fountain just in time to see the stranger extend a trembling hand toward Buddy. The desperate, heart-wrenching look in my eyes mingled with a primal surge of fear as I realized that the kidnapping attempt was unfolding right in front of me. For a few eternal seconds, time itself appeared to pause. I heard my own breath ricochet off the water surface, mingling with the distant echoes of startled birds that took flight at the disturbance. In that split moment of horror, everything became acutely real, the barking of nearby dogs, the murmur of shocked onlookers, and the sickening realization that someone so calculated had dared to try and snatch away the creature who had taught me so much about love and loyalty. The stranger's hand reached out with deliberate slowness, as if savoring each millisecond of their audacious act. In that instant, the park transformed from a sanctuary of everyday life to a stage where a sinister plot was unfolding right before our eyes. Desperation seized me, and in a surge of instinct, I lunged forward. I shouted, my voice raw with emotion, a plea, a command, and a cry of anguish all wrapped into one. For a heartbeat, the world around me fractured into a mosaic of vivid details, the rapid flurry of my heartbeat, the tear that escaped down my cheek, and the distant, muffled sound of footsteps that pursued us from multiple angles. But even as I closed the gap between us, a strange paralysis held me back, as if the sheer shock of betrayal had momentarily robbed my limbs of their strength. Buddy, sensing danger in the swelling chaos, jerked his head in a way that conveyed both confusion and terror. His eyes, those warm pools of trust, pleaded silently for protection as he recoiled from the outstretched hand. The space between us and the stranger was now charged with a tension so palpable that the air seemed to shimmer with unspoken dread. In that moment, the boundaries between safety and menace blurred, leaving me caught in a nightmare woven from threads of raw, unfiltered emotion. I managed to push past the shock, scrambling after Buddy as the stranger's form momentarily merged with the shadows near the thick line of trees bordering the park's edge. I stumbled over scattered twigs and fallen leaves, my pulse thundering like a war drum in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to chase after them, to retrieve the only friend who had ever known my truest self. The disparity between the familiar comfort of my everyday routine and the surreal, almost cinematic horror of the moment was stark, and it unsettled me to my core. The chase led us deeper into the park, where the scenery transformed into a labyrinth of dimly lit trails and overgrown paths. I dared not slow my pace, my sole focus on reclaiming what had been so carelessly snatched away. The landscape around me was no longer the peaceful retreat of childhood joy. It had twisted into an ominous maze, every rustling leaf and sudden gust of wind fueling my mounting panic. As I navigated the winding path, the early whispers of a bustling city beyond the park's perimeter faded into an eerie silence, a silence that seemed to follow every step, every desperate gasp for breath. My mind raced with questions: who was that person, and what dark motive had driven them to commit such an act? Why would anyone risk altering the fragile equilibrium of a community, stealing away a beacon of unwavering affection? The more I pondered, the more my anxiety mounted, each unanswered question a chisel carving deeper into the bedrock of my trust in the world. In the midst of the turmoil, I recalled a peculiar conversation from just the previous evening, a casual remark by a neighbor about a string of unsolved odd occurrences in our area. Back then, I had brushed it off as idle chatter, but now it reverberated in my mind with a haunting clarity. The idea that such incidents could be connected to this moment of crisis sent shivers down my spine. The possibility that our seemingly safe neighborhood could harbor hidden dangers was a bitter pill to swallow, and I found myself questioning everything I once held true. Buddy's paws pounded the damp earth with frantic energy, each step taking him further away into the unknown recesses of the park. I struggled to keep pace, my thoughts a jumble of shock, determination, and despair. The shadows lengthened as the sun climbed higher, and every subtle shift in the ambient light seemed to echo the shifting dynamics of my rapidly deteriorating morning. It was as if nature itself was mirroring the darkness that had seeped into our lives, a slow, insidious reminder that sometimes even the most cherished bonds are vulnerable to the caprices of fate. Then, amidst the chaos and desperation, I heard a rustle, a soft, inconspicuous sound that signaled something unfamiliar. Turning sharply, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the stranger disappearing around a bend, merging with the thick stand of trees that bordered the park's far end. In that split second, uncertainty gripped me. Should I follow and risk plunging deeper into this unfolding mystery, or should I call for help, hoping that the collective vigilance of my community might bring Buddy back to safety? My heart pounded as I weighed my options. The sound of hurried footsteps and the distant murmur of alarmed voices reminded me that I was not alone in this place. Someone, somewhere, must have seen the unfolding drama too. Yet, even with the possibility of assistance, every second felt like a lifetime as I hesitated on the cusp of a decision that could forever alter the course of my day. My rational mind implored caution, yet a fierce protective instinct urged me to follow that shadow regardless of the risks. In that moment of indecision, the world narrowed to a single thought: retrieving Buddy. My feet moved before my mind could protest, carrying me towards the darkened corridor between neatly trimmed hedges and clusters of overgrown shrubs that served as a natural barrier to the park's exit. The narrow passage was a stark contrast to the open, sunlit avenues I had previously traversed. Here, under the oppressive cover of dense foliage, every sound was magnified, every movement potential evidence of danger. The natural acoustics of the garden area carried my heavy, labored breaths like a whisper of despair. I could feel the weight of every decision, every moment stretching out into an eternity of uncertainty. The tactile coolness of dew on the grass underfoot became a stark counterpoint to the burning heat of panic in my veins. I tried to convince myself that there was logic to be found in this chaos, a method to the madness of that very morning. But the deeper I ventured into the secluded part of the park, the more surreal and disorienting the scene became. At last, I reached a small clearing encircled by gnarled oak trees whose twisted limbs seemed to claw at the pale sky. The clearing was eerily quiet, a void of life and sound that contrasted sharply with the frantic pace of the chase I had been embroiled in. In the middle of it all, a single, weathered bench sat beneath the boughs like a silent witness to the unfolding events, a relic from quieter days that now served as a stark reminder of vulnerability in the face of inexplicable menace. I paused for a fleeting second, my eye scanning the area for any sign of Buddy or the elusive stranger. The silence was overwhelming, as if the clearing itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next act in this unfolding drama. It was then that I noticed a peculiar detail: a fragment of Buddy's favorite blue bandana lay crumpled on the ground near the bench. The sight of it sent an icy shudder down my spine. That simple piece of cloth, once a symbol of our playful adventures and unbreakable bond, had now become an omen of the crisis that threatened to tear my world apart. My mind raced as I gathered the implications of the scene before me. Had the stranger discarded it in haste, or was it a deliberate ploy to mislead me? The more I thought about it, the more my sense of foreboding deepened. I recalled every joyful moment spent with Buddy, the long walks in the park, the quiet evenings at home, and the shared glances that communicated more than words ever could. Losing him would be like losing a part of myself, a piece of the soul that had weathered every storm alongside me. Just then, a rustling sound from behind the cluster of trees snapped me out of my heavy reverie. My pulse quickened as I spun around, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. There, partially concealed by a thick trunk, I caught sight of a small bundle of fur, a glimpse of golden fur that unmistakably belonged to Buddy. His eyes, wide with an emotion that mirrored my own despair, locked onto mine. There was a desperate plea in his gaze, a silent call for help that pierced through every fiber of my being. In that electrifying moment, the intensity of the morning reached a fever pitch. All the unsettling threads of the day converged into a single, heart-stopping reality. My best friend, my constant companion, was caught in a predicament that neither of us could have ever foreseen. I rushed forward, my steps echoing against the cold ground, determined to bridge the gap between us despite the lingering presence of an unseen threat. The atmosphere was charged with a volatile mix of relief and dread, a momentary salvation that offered little comfort in the face of what lay ahead. Every second stretched out, each heartbeat an interminable reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictable cruelty of fate. The clearing, once a haven of natural beauty, had transformed into a battleground of conflicting emotions, a place where nostalgia clashed with terror, and the familiar was tainted by the inexplicable intrusion of malevolence. My voice trembled with a mix of urgency and tenderness as I called out to Buddy, my tone desperate yet resolute in the belief that nothing could sever the bond we shared. The exchange that followed was almost imperceptible, a silent communion of fear and relief that needed no words. In the midst of chaos, in that fragile enclave of nature's design, I knew that the danger was far from over. The mysterious figure was still out there, lurking in the periphery, their intentions as opaque and unsettling as the early morning mist. I could only grasp at the fragile hope that help would come or that my own resolve would be enough to rescue my friend from the clutches of this inexplicable threat. As I knelt beside Buddy, cradling him in a trembling embrace, the early brightness of the day seemed to wane, replaced by a shadow that crept steadily over the landscape of my soul. The reality of the situation, stark and unyielding, was that this was not a random mishap or an aberration of fate. It was a targeted act, a premeditated scheme that had invaded the sanctity of our daily life. And in that harrowing moment, the enormity of what was unfolding, the shattering realization that someone had dared to disrupt the quiet order of our world, overwhelmed me. I could feel my hand shaking uncontrollably as I gently wiped away a tear, one that was not merely born of fear but also of an overwhelming sense of betrayal by a world that I had trusted implicitly. The bond between a person and their dog is sacred and unspoken, built over years of shared moments, whispered confidences, and the silent promise of everlasting loyalty. To see that bond threatened, to witness an outsider's cold calculation in attempting to separate us, was an agony that defied description. In the final moments before the scene faded into a disquieting uncertainty, I vowed silently to myself and to Buddy that I would not let this injustice continue unchecked. I knew that the coming hours would demand every ounce of strength, courage, and resilience I possessed. The lingering image of that shadowy figure, disappearing yet ominously present in the recesses of my memory, was a stark reminder that the world could turn on us in an instant, unraveling the familiar fabric of our lives without warning. Even as I held Buddy close, listening to the unsteady rhythm of his breathing, I could sense that something deeper was unfolding, a narrative that would challenge every notion of security, and force me to confront the dark undercurrents that sometimes swirl beneath even the most ordinary surfaces. With the early morning light dimming and the park's friendly corners yielding to a more sinister ambience, I braced myself for a confrontation that promised to plunge us into a mystery as bewildering as it was personal. The world around me had transformed in those fleeting, painful moments, from a haven of benign routines to a stage set for a drama of betrayal and lost innocence. And as I gathered Buddy into my arms, determined to shield him from further harm, I knew in the depths of my soul that nothing would ever be the same again. The calm facade of my everyday life had been irrevocably shattered, replaced by a turbulent storm of emotions and revelations that would force me to traverse unknown territories of fear and resilience. In that charged silence, as the echoes of the morning's quiet desperation hung in the air, I realized that our journey was just beginning. The shadow that had come to steal away a piece of my heart was still lurking, its intentions cloaked in mystery, waiting to unveil the darker layers of a tale that would test the limits of loyalty, the power of memory, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his best friend. I pressed my forehead against the cool bark of an ancient oak, seeking some semblance of strength from its silent, enduring presence. The crisp rustle of leaves overhead was a whispered promise that no matter how tempestuous the storm, the roots of what was true would remain steadfast. And while the day promised many unanswered questions and trials yet to come, I clung to the flickering hope that, armed with love and determination, Buddy and I would eventually reclaim our world from the clutches of this inexplicable menace. Every step forward was a silent pledge to honor that bond, to defy the darkness that dared to encroach upon our peace. In the bittersweet interplay of light and shadow, I could sense that this was more than a mere act of mischief. It was a moment of reckoning, a call to arms for anyone who had ever cherished what was most dear. And so, with Buddy nestled close and my heart heavy yet resolute, I began to tread the uncertain path ahead, ready to confront the echoes of that fateful morning and to unravel the truth behind the nefarious attempt that had forever altered the course of my life. The sun's rays grew bolder, slicing through the gloom like shards of hope amidst despair, and I found myself silently vowing that no matter what lay ahead, the bond with my cherished friend would be the beacon that guided us through the longest, darkest night. The lingering echo of that fateful morning propelled me forward even as my thoughts whirled in turmoil. With Buddy cradled close to my chest, I managed to gather myself in the midst of that unsettling clearing, every sense straining against the oppressive weight of uncertainty. The adrenaline that had fueled my desperate sprint now mingled with a cautious resolve as I stepped away from the sanctuary of oak trees and toward the park's far side. I knew the stranger's presence was far from over, their intentions hidden in the shifting interplay of shadow and light. Every footfall on the dew-dampened earth reverberated with both a quiet determination and a tremor of apprehension. Leaving the clearing behind, I emerged onto a narrow pathway that skirted the park's periphery. The path wound past a cluster of modest row houses, each one bearing silent witness to generations of simple, everyday lives. Their tidy front gardens, freshly manicured hedges, and weathered porches offered an illusion of normalcy that now struck me as painfully fragile in light of what had transpired. The suburban calm felt like a thin veneer over simmering tensions. The ordinary had suddenly become charged with dread. Every rustle of leaves and every murmur of a neighbor conversing behind drawn curtains was tinged with an underlying sense of foreboding, as though the very air had transformed into a clandestine carrier of secrets. Buddy, sensing my inner disquiet even after the immediate terror had passed, nestled against me with a soft whine of reassurance. His fur, still damp from the morning's sweat, brushed against my skin and anchored me to the reality that I needed to protect this living testament of unconditional trust. The clear blue of his eyes, luminous in the early sunlight, filled me with a bittersweet reminder that the bond we shared was worth every risk, even as every instinct screamed caution. In that quiet interval between one heartbeat and the next, I recalled the earlier hints of discord whispered by neighbors and the inexplicable oddities that had punctuated my days in our tranquil community. The discarded glove, the hastily abandoned ashtray, these were fragments of an unfolding puzzle, pieces that now converged into a picture far more disturbing than I had ever imagined. The notion that an individual could weave such calculated disruption into the fabric of our daily routine was almost unfathomable, yet there it was, a stark reminder that danger, however subtle, can lurk right behind the familiar. I reached a juncture where the path curved gently toward the edge of a small parking area, its asphalt surface contrasting sharply with the soft, spongy ground of the park. Here, the atmosphere shifted once more as the surrounding quiet gave way to a more industrial hum, the low murmur of idling cars, the distant chirp of sprinklers, and the occasional clatter of early morning deliveries. It was here that I sensed the first tangible clue that the sinister force behind the kidnapping was far more organized and determined than a simple act of misfortune. A single car, incongruously parked near the lot's entrance, seemed out of place amidst the usual cadence of neighborhood vehicles, a subtle beacon of malintent glimmering in the early light. Its presence was a silent, unnerving punctuation in a narrative that had already stretched the limits of comprehension. The instinct to uncover the truth pushed me to slow my pace and cautiously circle toward the parked vehicle. Every cautious step carried me deeper into a labyrinth of half-seen details, a dark stain on the pavement that might have been spilled coffee, a smudged print on a nearby window, and the reflective gleam of something metallic half-concealed beneath a discarded newspaper. The latter caught my eye, a glint that hinted at a key, perhaps carelessly dropped during the swift departure of someone who had been here too recently. I bent to retrieve it, my fingers trembling as I gingerly picked it up. The key was cold, its surface etched with faint, mysterious marks that defied immediate explanation. It was a silent clue, a tangible remnant of a moment that had already unraveled the carefully spun tapestry of my morning routine. As I held the key against the growing brightness of day, thoughts raced through my mind like restless fragments of an unsolved mystery. Who had owned it? Was it merely an accidental loss or a deliberate misstep meant to implicate someone? The questions intensified as the realization dawned that I was, in some way, being drawn deeper into this intricate maze of betrayal. Without fully understanding the gravity of this discovery, I slipped the key into my pocket, a small but potent symbol of the rising storm. I knew that the stranger wasn't merely a transient menace, they were part of something larger, a deliberate disruption that targeted the sacred bond between a person and their loyal companion. There was an almost imperceptible shift in the surroundings as I turned back toward the path, glancing warily over my shoulder. The parked sedan now seemed even more sinister against the backdrop of the awakening neighborhood. I felt a persistent tug of vulnerability, the idea that the familiar streets I had traversed countless times were now stages for a drama I never wished to witness. Every shadow, every reflection in a storefront window, seemed to mimic a hidden danger waiting to pounce. I resumed my journey, driven by both the urgency to keep Buddy safe and the unrelenting curiosity that this perplexing incident had awakened within me. As I neared the intersection that led out of the residential enclave, the conversation of early risers reached my ears, a casual yet disembodied murmur that signified normalcy amid the chaos that lay just beneath the surface. Yet even in that brief moment of familiar daily ritual, a neighbor watering her garden or an elderly couple sweeping their front step, the undercurrent of menace remained palpable. It was as if the entire street had been subtly repainted with hues of tension, each mundane detail infused with unspoken apprehension. A subtle drizzle began, soft at first, adding a reflective sheen to the concrete and dusting the leaves with tiny rivulets of water. The rain was neither harsh nor prolonged, it was a quiet, almost tender accompaniment to the storm raging within me. In that muted symphony of droplets, I found myself clinging to the duality of nature's promise. The rain could cleanse and renew, yet it also harbored the potential to obscure clarity and transform familiar landscapes into disorienting, fluid stages of uncertainty. I guided Buddy toward a small, unassuming cafe at the corner of the street, a place that had always been a beloved haven for locals. Its warm, inviting glow contrasted sharply with the chill that had gripped my heart over the past hour. The cafe's windows, fogged with the breath of early customers, offered a rare slice of normality, a brief respite where the clamor of the outside world softened into comforting murmurs. I knew that here, for a moment, I could regather my thoughts, share a few cautious words with someone who might understand, and perhaps even muster the resolve to take the next necessary step. Inside the cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries mingled with the soft murmur of subdued conversations. I settled into a corner seat by a rain-speckled window, Buddy pressed against my side, his usual vibrant energy subdued by the lingering effects of the ordeal. I ordered a cup of black coffee, its bitter, robust flavor serving as a potent metaphor for the complex emotions that coursed through me. As I sipped the steaming brew, my eyes scanned the room, pausing occasionally on a kindly face or a warm smile, seeking both solace and silent assurance that I wasn't alone in this tangled web of inexplicable events. Yet even as the cafe exuded its comfortable embrace, the shadows of the morning lingered. In hushed whispers that carried over the gentle clink of ceramic cups and soft laughter, fragments of conversation hinted at similar peculiarities, stories of odd occurrences, of missing personal items, and of unsettling strangers slipping through the peripheries of everyday life. Each snippet of dialogue fueled my growing determination, a desire not only to protect Buddy but also to unmask the truth behind this orchestrated intrusion into a community that prided itself on simplicity and quiet dignity. When my coffee cup was empty and the raindrops outside had grown into a light, persistent drizzle, I rose with a renewed sense of purpose. I stepped back out onto the glistening sidewalk, the cool water droplets mingling with the beads of perspiration on my face as I set my gaze toward the next phase of what had become an unexpected investigation. There were no guarantees that answers lay ahead, but the key in my pocket and the vivid recollections of every sensory detail from that morning formed a fragile, interlocking chain of evidence that I knew I must pursue. The road ahead beckoned with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. Every step away from the cafe, from the fleeting comfort of its warmth, drew me deeper into a labyrinth of questions that refused to be neatly compartmentalized. The day was unfolding with the unpredictable cadence of a carefully composed symphony, one in which every note, however discordant, contributed to a larger narrative of loss, determination, and the unyielding desire to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Before long, I found myself standing at the threshold of a modest community center that served as a gathering point for local residents, a space where neighbors exchanged news, supported one another, and, on occasion, discussed the anomalies of daily life. The building itself was unremarkable, yet it held the collective heartbeat of the community. I hesitated at the entrance for a moment, gathering the courage to step inside and share the gravity of my experience. I needed someone who could not only confirm what I had witnessed, but also provide the practical guidance necessary to confront an adversary who was intent on subverting the natural order of our lives. Inside the community center, the atmosphere was subdued, punctuated by the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle rustling of papers from a small bulletin board. I approached an elderly woman known affectionately as Mrs. Caldwell, whose reputation for wisdom and quiet strength had earned her the respect of nearly everyone in our neighborhood. With a furrowed brow and a nod of acknowledgement, I recounted what had happened earlier: the suspicious sedan, the discarded key, the frantic chase through the park, and the gut-wrenching moment when I had nearly lost Buddy. Her eyes narrowed in a mixture of concern and quiet resolve as she listened intently, every detail adding to an increasingly complex puzzle that had now ensnared more than just my personal life. Mrs. Caldwell's words were measured and deliberate. "Sometimes," she began, "the world sends us signs, pieces of a larger story that we are meant to unravel together. You're not the first to see these strange happenings, and you certainly won't be the last." There was a gentleness in her tone that belied the gravity of her message, a reassurance that, even in the midst of inexplicable events, the community's collective wisdom could provide guidance. Her suggestion to contact a small network of vigilant locals, individuals who had noticed similar disturbances in recent weeks, was both a call to action and an invitation to join forces against a threat that had crept up unnoticed on our doorstep. In that quiet exchange, I realized that this was no longer an isolated incident. It was part of a broader tapestry of subtle disruptions that had been unfolding beneath the surface of our everyday existence. The thought sent a chill of both apprehension and solidarity through me. I agreed to meet the group later that day at a predetermined spot in the center's parking lot, where we could discuss the strange events further, share any additional clues, and plan our next steps together. As I stepped back out into the drizzle, Buddy nestled securely in my arms once more, I felt the weight of a newfound responsibility settle upon my shoulders. The journey had taken a dark, unexpected detour into a realm where the ordinary had been redefined by calculated mischief and eerie intent. Yet, amid the anxiety and uncertainty, there was also a glimmer of hope, a communal determination that what had been initiated in the shadows would eventually be brought into the light, purified by the resilience of those unwilling to let fear dictate their lives. The drizzle began to ease into a gentle, comforting patter, as if the heavens themselves wished to lend a hand in soothing the scars of the morning. A cautious optimism stirred within me, our belief that, through steadfast resolve and collective effort, the threads of this mystery would one day be woven into an intelligible tapestry of truth. The key in my pocket served as a tangible reminder of my commitment to uncovering the reality of this intrusion, while Buddy's soft, trusting presence reinforced the promise that no adversary, however shrouded in darkness, could ever truly sever the unyielding bond between us. Each step along the pavement felt symbolic, a defiant march against the undercurrents of discord and the strange disruption that threatened the delicate balance of our lives. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with uncertainties, that every clue uncovered might lead to more questions than answers. Yet I was ready to face those challenges head-on, driven by a deep-seated love for my best friend and a resolute desire to restore the ordinary beauty of our shared existence. As the community center's meeting time approached, I moved slowly along the familiar street, a cascade of memories and emotions flooding back with every familiar landmark. The quiet residential streets, the well-tended gardens, and even the distant laughter of children playing in a nearby park, each detail now carried the double edge of normalcy and caution. I would soon learn that beneath the unassuming veneer of our everyday world, an insidious narrative was being written, a story of calculated defiance, subtle intimidation, and an audacity that threatened to disturb the sanctity of trust. With each cautious step, I reconciled the two opposing forces within me, the unrelenting urge to protect what mattered most, and the dawning realization that the peaceful facade of my community had been irrevocably altered. Today, I was not just a victim of a brazen act, I was also a reluctant investigator in a mystery that would test the limits of courage, the strength of human connection, and the resilience of a bond forged over countless shared moments of joy and sorrow. Standing at the threshold of what promised to be a pivotal meeting with my neighbors, I felt the resolve harden within me. The events of the morning had cast a long, dark shadow, but they had also ignited a flame, a spark of unyielding determination that would not be easily extinguished. With Buddy safely by my side and the muffled sounds of community voices gathering in the background, I stepped forward into a future that was as uncertain as it was demanding, yet illuminated by the promise that together we would reclaim the sanctity of our lives from the grasp of those who dared to disrupt it. The community center's hushed corridors gave way to a determination that thrummed quietly beneath each neighbor's steady gaze. Inside that modest room, illuminated by the dull glow of aged fluorescent lights, every word and every pause carried the weight of shared uncertainty. I listened intently as Mr. Eldridge, the retired engineer with insightful eyes, detailed other unsettling anomalies, missed deliveries, unaccounted for visitors, and peculiar lapses in our daily routine that had quietly accumulated over recent weeks. Even as his measured tone pierced the subdued silence, I could sense the collective pulse of our community quickening in anxious unison. At a long, weathered table, we gathered together. Our voices, though soft, built a tapestry of recollections and fears. I recounted my own harrowing sequence, the mysterious sedan that glinted like an omen at dawn, the inexplicable key with its strange etchings, and that heart-stopping moment in the park when Buddy's eyes, wide with desperation, seemed to plead for rescue. The vivid imagery of those fleeting seconds had transformed the park, a place once bathed in gentle light and everyday normalcy, into a scene of calculated menace. Mrs. Caldwell, whose steady presence had long been a pillar of reassurance in our small enclave, leaned forward. "There are signs here," she said quietly, a collection of small, almost unnoticeable details that, when pieced together, point to something far more deliberate than chance. Her voice, soft yet unwavering, buoyed our spirits, reminding us that even the smallest insight could fuel a resistance against the encroaching darkness. Ava, a young neighbor whose quiet resolve had often inspired many of us, suggested that we compile every detail into a careful log, a meticulous record of dates, times, and observations. Every stray item, she urged, every peculiar occurrence could be a piece of this puzzle. We must be as vigilant as we are compassionate. The resonance of her words was electric, sparking a shared determination that surged in that cramped space, binding us together in our silent vow to shield our sanctuary from further breaches. In that room, every face became an emblem of unity, each person a guardian of the small, unassuming truths that had been disrupted. The assembling of our scattered memories fashioned a collective blueprint, a promise that while our daily lives might have been disturbed by an intruder's calculated maneuver, our bonds of trust and community would not be fractured without a fierce, unified response. After the meeting, as the neighbors dispersed into the cool evening air and the community center's doors closed with a muted finality, I emerged with Buddy by my side and a renewed sense of purpose. Outside, the drizzle had given way to intermittent sunshine that danced weakly on slick sidewalks. In every reflection on a rain-spattered window, I saw the shimmering fragment of hope and an unspoken promise that every mystery, no matter how carefully concealed by shadows, would eventually be unraveled if we stayed true to our collective vigilance. I walked slowly through the familiar streets, my thoughts a torrent of questions and quiet determination. The key I had pocketed earlier was more than a discarded artifact, it was a tangible link to a mystery that demanded resolution. As I retraced the pathways of our neighborhood, the everyday landmarks, the neatly trimmed hedges, the brightly painted mailboxes, the chirp of evening sparrows, each wore a new, fragile patina of caution. It was as if the familiar world had been repainted in shades of both comfort and caution. Normalcy remained in sight, but now edged with the tremulous possibility of disruption. Through the subtle interplay of light and shadow, I began to feel the pulse of the city itself, a living, breathing reminder that within every serene moment could reside the seeds of incertitude. In that reflective solitude, my mind replayed the relentless chase in the park, the desperate plea in Buddy's eyes, and the shuttered mystery of that dark sedan. Those images echoed like refrain in a song of quiet defiance, urging me to continue not only for myself and Buddy, but for all those who believe that trust should never be so casually compromised. At home, as dusk thickened into night, I sat by a modest window and jotted down every sensory detail of the day, the damp coolness of the pavement under my sneakers, the muted chorus of residents whispering in low tones about fleeting, inexplicable events, and even the subtle scent of rain lingering in the air. Each note was a step toward reclaiming the narrative of our lives, a way to restore the fragile equilibrium that the morning's events had shattered. I resolved to keep that record safe. It was both a memoir and a silent testimony to the fact that even a community's most beloved traditions could be threatened by an unseen hand. Buddy, curled up at my feet, offered silent solace with every soft murmur and gentle blink of his trusting eyes. He was more than a companion, he was the living embodiment of everything precious and irreplaceable in my life. In his presence, I found both the courage to face the uncertainty and the determination to piece together every clue that had come my way. With the key resting securely in my pocket and the fragmented memories of the day etched like scars upon my mind, I made a promise to remain ever watchful, to understand the disturbing rhythm that had invaded our days, and to stand firm as the guardian of our shared sanctuary. That night, beneath the soft hum of a cooling fan and the reassuring cadence of nightfall, I acknowledged that our once placid neighborhood now whispered of changes beyond our immediate grasp. Yet, in that silence, the embers of resolve smoldered steadily. I envisioned the coming days filled with both small victories and daunting uncertainties, each moment a chance to reclaim our stolen peace. In the quiet solitude of the twilight hours, as I prepared for the rest of an unpredictable night, I knew that every whispered memory, every subtle detail logged, would serve as a beacon against the darkness. The lingering question, who was behind these unsettling disruptions, and what drove them to disrupt the very heart of our community, remained unanswered, burning quietly like a candle in the wind. But I held on to the conviction that as long as we continued to stand together, even the most calculated intrusions would eventually yield to the resolute pursuit of truth and the enduring strength of our bonds. As sleep slowly beckoned, I silently reaffirmed my pledge, come dawn, with Buddy by my side and the persistent light of a united community guiding my way, I would once again step forth into a world that, despite its newfound shadows, was still mine to protect. The following events unfolded under a sky heavy with the weight of unresolved questions and a lingering chill that refused to be dispelled by the gentle embrace of daybreak. As the new morning unfurled with reluctant light, the air itself seemed to vibrate with a spectral warning, a muted promise that the night's unease was far from over. In a small park on the outskirts of our troubled neighborhood, I and a band of resolute locals gathered once again under the watchful eyes of weathered trees that had silently witnessed decades of peace. The atmosphere was ripe with expectation, as if every rustle in the undergrowth and each whispering breeze conspired to reveal some hidden truth. Buddy padded softly at my side, his ears twitching at each subtle sound, a language of survival honed over years of companionship. The community had resolved to come together, their individual recollections weaving into a collective tapestry of observation and quiet defiance. A hastily assembled map lay on the table, dotted with markings at locations that each stranger had reported seeing unusual figures or mysterious vehicles. Every suggestion was treated with cautious respect, each possibility a fragile thread connecting us to the larger mystery that had invaded our lives. It was then that a breakthrough moment crystallized amid the hushed voices. A neighbor recalled seeing a figure, the same dark outline from that fateful morning, making furtive gestures in a shadowed lot near the abandoned warehouse by the river. The warehouse, once a relic of an older industrial era now reclaimed by creeping ivy and the soft decay of time, had always exuded an air of forgotten stories. Today, it was cast in a new role, the potential hub of the orchestrated scheme that had threatened to unravel the sacrosanct bond between a man and his loyal friend. A plan took shape in our midst, a cautious yet determined expedition to trace this figure. The group divided, careful not to draw undue attention yet pooling the knowledge and resolve that only a community united in purpose could muster. I led a small contingent toward the warehouse, every step measured and heavy with the gravity of our cause. The city's urban sprawl melted into a quieter, derelict zone where cracked cement and wild overgrowth had become the norm. The contrast with the previously familiar avenues was stark, a place where nature and neglect intertwined in eerie, tangible whispers of regret and forgotten promises. At the threshold of the warehouse, I paused, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle into my bones. The building loomed like a silent sentinel guarding secrets too dangerous to be articulated. Every detail, the peeling paint, the shattered window frames through which morning light filtered like hesitant hope, spoke of histories that should have remained undisturbed. Yet, here I was, compelled by an urgent need to re-establish what had been nearly torn apart. Buddy's steady presence at my side was a fierce reminder of the stakes, a cherished life that had been jeopardized by a shadowy interloper. Inside, the structure was a labyrinth of forgotten corridors and cavernous halls, each echoing with the ghosts of a time when life was simpler, when danger was something far removed from the innocent rhythms of daily existence. I moved cautiously, every step measured against the backdrop of uncertainty. The group's efforts were silent yet relentless, a careful sweep of hidden corners, an exchange of whispered signals, and a tight bond of mutual trust that each of us clung to in the face of mounting peril. The cold concrete walls seemed to absorb our collective resolve, as if they too were awaiting the shattering of long-held tranquility. In one desolate corner of the warehouse, marked by a single, flickering fluorescent light that struggled against the encroaching dark, I discovered the most damning evidence yet. A small scrap of fabric, unmistakable in its vivid hue, lay abandoned on the dusty floor. I recognized it instantly as part of Buddy's cherished blue bandana, the same one that had once been a symbol of playful adventures and now had become a calling card of betrayal. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, a blend of sorrow and a fierce, unwavering determination. This was no accident. It was a deliberate message left behind by someone who thought they could manipulate and unsettle the core of trust and love. My heart pounded as I traced my fingers over the faded texture of the fabric, every detail etched into memory. The group exchanged wary glances, their expressions a mix of horror and defiant resolve. A plan was quickly reformed then. We would gather every scrap of evidence, every whispered tale, and every trace that might lead us to the elusive architect of our misery. Our mission was not just to reclaim a lost moment or a stolen piece of companionship, but to reaffirm a truth that had been threatened, the unbreakable bond between a person and their best friend, forged in moments of quiet joy and hardened against the unexpected tides of fate. Outside, the sky wore a sober, steely hue as morning deepened. The distant echo of city life, sirens, hurried footsteps, murmured voices, mingled with the quiet determination emanating from our small band of protectors. It became clear that the drive to restore normalcy was stronger than any attempt to subvert it. The evidence in that forsaken hall was not merely a sign of what had occurred, it was a promise that we would not allow this dark chapter to define our community. Together, we vowed to reclaim every stolen second, every moment of unburdened companionship, and to stand vigil against the encroaching gloom that had dared to disrupt our sacred sanctuary. In those final moments before the warehouse yielded its secrets to our persistent inquiry, I allowed myself a small, resolute exhalation, one that mingled relief with a lingering urgency. I looked down at Buddy, whose gentle eyes conveyed a silent message of trust and strength. Despite the ordeal, his presence affirmed that some bonds, no matter how fiercely tested, remained impervious to the machinations of those who thrived on fear and uncertainty. As our small team collected the final pieces of evidence and began to leave the desolate labyrinth, the day broke fully, its light a fierce, unyielding testament to the endurance of hope. Each step back toward the familiar heart of our neighborhood was marked by a renewed promise that we would shine light into every shadow, that no attempt to steal away what was most cherished would succeed without a tireless, unyielding fight. With the evidence secured and the echoes of that harrowing night firmly ingrained in my memory, I knew the journey was only just beginning. We would take every piece of evidence to the authorities, share our stories with an unbreakable community, and ensure that every heart, human and canine alike, would be shielded from future darkness. That resolve, as steadfast as the rising sun, was our true victory, a declaration that even amidst unexpected peril, the bonds of loyalty and the strength of community would always prevail. In the days that followed our fateful encounter at the warehouse, an unyielding determination to reclaim the sanctity of our community and the precious bond with Buddy propelled the investigation into overdrive. The evidence we had painstakingly gathered, a torn fragment of the blue bandana, the cryptic markings on the abandoned key, and the detailed eyewitness accounts from sympathetic neighbors, was compiled into a coherent dossier that left little room for doubt. Someone had deliberately tried to pry away what meant the world to me. I took the carefully assembled folder to the local precinct, where a small team of seasoned officers listened with measured concern. Their faces, lined with years of witnessing the complex interplay between human frailty and resilience, reflected an understanding that this was more than a petty crime. It was an act that had attempted to sever a bond as pure and unyielding as the one I shared with Buddy. In the sterile light of the interrogation room, the pieces of the puzzle were laid out, every detail, every painstaking observation was accepted as undeniable evidence that a calculated misdeed had invaded our community's quiet sanctuary. Over the next several days, the investigation unfolded with a blend of methodical police work and fervent community cooperation. Neighbors came forward, each adding their own recollections, snatches of conversations overheard on quiet streets, glimpses of strange figures under the dim glow of street lamps, and moments of inexplicable tension that had become too frequent to dismiss. This collective vigilance knit together the diverse threads of suspicion into a tapestry that suggested a coordinated attempt to disrupt our lives for reasons that, even now, remain partially shrouded in ambiguity. I found myself making repeated visits to the precinct, not only to offer further testimony but also to seek solace in the company of officers who took my concerns to heart. The quiet reassurance in their measured words and the diligent care with which they treated the evidence instilled in me a fragile hope. Slowly, the investigation began to bear fruit. A breakthrough came when the key, with its mysterious etchings, was traced back to a long-forgotten lease agreement for a property on the outskirts of town, a property owned by a man whose recent financial troubles had been the subject of hushed rumors among local residents. With this connection in hand, the authorities expanded their focus to a network of individuals whose names had surfaced in whispered conversations, each tied together by a common thread of desperation and clandestine dealings. Meanwhile, the community itself transformed in ways I had never anticipated. The once passive neighborhood now buzzed with a collective spirit of determination. Residents who had previously exchanged only pleasantries on morning walks now organized regular patrols, established neighborhood watch groups, and maintained open lines of communication. The incident, harrowing as it was, had awakened a dormant resolve among us, a shared commitment to protect the warmth of our quiet corners from the encroaching shadows of malice. Every evening, as I sat by the window with Buddy curled up at my feet, I reflected on the delicate interplay between trust and fear. There was a raw vulnerability in knowing that someone had dared to violate the haven we had all built together, yet there was also an even stronger realization that the bonds between us, between a man and his best friend, between neighbors who had once shared only routine greetings, were far more resilient than any ill-conceived attempt to break them. Buddy's steady, trusting eyes and the subtle reassurance of his presence became for me a living manifesto that love, in its purest form, could defy even the darkest strategies concocted by those who sought to exploit our vulnerabilities. One crisp autumn morning, not long after the case had been officially taken over by the detectives, I found myself invited to a community assembly held at the local town hall. The room was filled with familiar faces, neighbors who had shared in the fear and the hope of those turbulent weeks, and there was an air of sober reflection mingled with cautious optimism. The lead investigator, a no-nonsense woman whose reputation was built on years of unraveling similarly perplexing cases, addressed us with a calm determination. "We are closing in on a group responsible for an insidious campaign of exploitation within our community," she announced, her tone both reassuring and resolute. "The evidence is compelling, and we are coordinating with regional authorities to ensure that every aspect of this case is thoroughly investigated. Today, I want to thank you for your vigilance and courage. This is a testament to the strength that comes when a community unites against those who seek to sow discord and fear." In that moment, the murmurs of relief that rippled through the crowd felt like the collective exhale of a community that had long lived under a shadow of uncertainty. For me, the reassurance was deeply personal. It felt as though the universe had offered a momentary reprieve, a silent acknowledgement that the simple joy of morning walks with Buddy, the spontaneous laughter echoing from familiar doorsteps, and the unspoken promise of protection among neighbors were all worth defending with every fiber of our being. As the investigation advanced, the threads began to unravel further. The financial records connected to the mysterious key pointed inexorably toward a small syndicate involved in orchestrating thefts and minor extortions, their methods subtle yet calculated. While the notion that anyone would stoop to attempting a kidnapping of a beloved pet seemed unfathomable, the evidence laid bare a convoluted plan, a misguided but deliberate attempt to weaken the foundations of trust within our close-knit community. In a society where every casualty of cruelty leaves behind a palpable scar, our unity shined as both a witness and a bulwark against the encroaching tide of exploitation. On a chilly, overcast afternoon, I received a call from one of the investigators informing me that several suspects had been taken into custody. The news was bittersweet, a triumph in a battle fought on the emotional front lines, but also a sober reminder of how fragile our sense of security can be. The apprehended individuals were now facing charges that carried the weight of their transgressions, and while justice in its full scope would require time to unfold, that day marked the turning of a page in a narrative that once felt dominated by darkness. Returning home after that call, I took a slow, deliberate walk with Buddy along the familiar sidewalk that now bore the unmistakable marks of shared resilience. The neighborhood, vibrant with its renewed spirit, had reasserted itself as a place where the bonds between neighbors were guarded as fiercely as any treasured possession. In the playful dance of fallen leaves and the gentle cadence of familiar footsteps, there was a profound affirmation that we had not been broken. Instead, we had grown stronger, our resolve hardened in the crucible of adversity. The finality of the arrests did not erase the scars left by those unsettling days, nor did it fully dispel the lingering questions of why someone would target a bond as sacred as that between a man and his dog. Yet, in the clarity of twilight as I sat on my front porch, Buddy's soft snores mingling with the nocturnal chorus of crickets, I felt a deep sense of resolve. I had come to understand that life was a tapestry woven with both light and shadow, a reminder that while darkness might visit unexpectedly, it could never permanently eclipse the steadfast glow of loyalty, love, and communal solidarity. In the quiet aftermath, as the community slowly returned to its daily rhythms, every shared smile and tentative greeting echoed with the promise of a new beginning. The case had become more than an isolated incident of calculated mischief. It was a catalyst, a painful but transformative experience that had deepened our commitment to one another. And in the soft, enduring light of the next sunrise, as Buddy and I embarked on another morning walk, there was an unspoken understanding that although the scars of fear might linger, they would forever be outshone by the resilient, unwavering power of unity and trust. Thus, as the season turned and leaves gave way to winter's stark beauty, the memory of that terrifying kidnapping attempt remained a solemn chapter in our collective history. Yet it was not defined solely by fear, but by the strength that arose from confronting that fear, the courage to stand together, and the enduring testament that the bond between a man and his best friend could withstand even the most calculated assaults on trust. And in every shared glance, every embrace, and every step forward into an uncertain tomorrow, the light of that steadfast bond shone ever brighter, promising that no shadow, however dark, could ever truly dim the radiance of love and loyalty.